I treated my job as I was the owner. So even though I was a sales exec earning £16,000 a year, no commission, in my little brain, I was the owner. And I think thinking like that it came across that level of authority. And it did come down to three things, which was you've got to attract the right prospects into your world. You've got to solve those prospects' problems so they become a client. And you've got to keep those clients for life so they become raving fans. And that's the ask philosophy principles. So many companies or salespeople struggle to articulate their USPs, their unique selling points. And I've got an issue with a USP because it's about you, not about the customer.
I love that.
No one wants to be sold to. I think it's a UCB, a unique client benefit. And to really know what our UCBs are, we have to ask our customers.
My guest for this episode is Tony Morris. Tony is an international sales speaker, the best-selling author of 5 books, and his company, Tony Morris International, has helped over 50,000 salespeople in 47 industries perform at the top of their game. I first met Tony several years ago and I was really impressed by his no-nonsense approach to sales. So I'm delighted to have him on the show to share his wisdom and some brilliant tools and techniques. As always, if you like what you hear, please do like, subscribe and comment. It will mean the world to me and will help this podcast reach as many people as possible. You don't want to miss this. Enjoy. Tony, welcome to the show. My first question for you. In life, what is the most important thing that you've ever had to pitch for?
Probably my wife. I would say, I'd have to say it's her birthday today. So if she listens to this, I guess my wife.
Awesome. I'm assuming it's a successful pitch and we're all still married.
It took about 6 months to win her over. The sales cycle was about 6 months. So actually the pitch itself wasn't overly successful, but the fortunes of the follow-up. So, so 23 years later, we're all good.
We're all good. Love it. And if you think about your kind of career, are there any kind of big pitches that stand out for you?
There is actually. So probably 3 years into my career, I was selling software, address management software. And I got an opportunity. It was an inbound inquiry from a Parisian bank called BNP Paribas. And I was up against my biggest competitor, QAS. And it was a 6-month deal to close. And I won it. But the interesting point was it was a £250,000 deal. So it was the biggest deal ever at the company's history. But 29 days into a 30-day cooling off period, they cancelled. And it was painful. It was really painful, but I took a lot away from it. But it was a good experience, and I took a lot away. But it did hurt. What was
the kind of big takeaway for you from that experience?
Probably 2 or 3 things. One is sometimes this thing's out of your control, and there's nothing you can do about it. And ultimately, what happened as a summary is the competitor QAS, who they lost, they went in half price. So after the contracts were signed, they went in half price and they couldn't turn that away. Which is fair enough. And that's out of my control. So I think it taught me focus on your controllables. And it also taught me about the keeping in touch. That 6-month process, I maintained control through the whole process. And I think that's what led me to winning it, even though I lost it in the end, out of my control. I think that was the key. It was that touch point, that nurture touch point through 6 months.
Yeah, it's just so important, that nurture process. We can focus so much on the moment, the deal, but actually it's about that relationship building and making people feel like you understand them and that that you care ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've won some clients in my 23 years that's taken me 2 years to close, and that's because there's been changes in their business, their sales teams, whatever, but I've kept in touch. So when the time was right, I'm the one they're thinking about.
Yeah, awesome. So you're the author of 5 books. You've spoken all over the world. You've worked with over 50,000 sales professionals across 47 industries. But what's your story? Like, what did you want to be as a kid? Have you always had this sort of fascination with the sales process?
No. There was two things I wanted to do, actually. One, I wanted to be a vet. Because I got a dog when I was 7, a Yorkshire Terrier, who I was besotted by. Absolutely, he was called Rocky. I named him Rocky. And when I was 13, he got attacked by an Alsatian. We were walking, and he'd survived. He had 97 stitches.
Wow!
And it put me off being a vet. I just thought it was such a painful experience that put me off. Then I wanted to be an actor, like your good self. I think I've always enjoyed telling stories.
Yeah.
And I've always been told I'm quite good at telling stories. So I thought that would be quite good acting. And although I didn't really pursue that, I guess sales and speaking is the next sort of best thing, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so many of us are actors, whether we kind of tread the boards or not. There's all of that kind of coming into what we do, not necessarily pretending to be someone else, but sort of being able to amplify yourself and sort of share different aspects of your own performance.
Exactly that. And I never really wanted to be an entrepreneur or a business. It wasn't a driver for me. And it wasn't until I set my company up in 2006. Even then, I saw it as a job. But I think 2 years into it, I thought, you know what, without being arrogant, I'm actually okay at this. I'm getting some really good results from my clients. And I fell in love with selling. And ever since, I've been almost obsessed with persuasion, influence, communication. I just find it fascinating.
So what were some of the early jobs you did? Because, you know, like most people have got the working in the bar or, you know, selling stuff door to door. What was early Tony?
Well, it's funny, actually. There's sort of 3 or 4 things. So I did car washing when I was about 11.
Awesome.
Door-to-door car washing, which was cool, with my best friend at the time, Mark Fraid. Then this is quite funny and embarrassing, but it's funny. I was at a very good school called St Albans, a private school where Stephen Hawkins went.
Yeah.
And my best friend there, Mark Grant, found his dad's porn stash. He had but honestly, he had a suitcase of porn magazines. And Mark said, "I don't want them, just sell them." I was like, all right. So I became the porn king. I literally became the porn king for about 2 years, made a fortune. And then I worked in a convenience store. So, and it was interesting, actually, the convenience store, because it took me about 3 months to get the job, because a guy called Dale said there's no jobs, and I knocked every single weekend. My dad took me, and he finally said, "You're so irritating. I admire your tenacity. I'll give you a job." And I was there for about 4 years. I then moved into a call center after university traveling, and then started selling. So software, where I did that deal with BNP. That was my first, I guess, proper sales job.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. That kind of entrepreneurial spark, if you like, even though you said you didn't sort of think of yourself as an entrepreneur, that early stuff of, selling certain things in school corridors and knocking on doors to wash cars really, shows that determination. And I suppose what's interesting there for me as well is that kind of sense of like self-belief and confidence seems quite high as a kid.
I think it's vital, and not just in selling, right? In life, and I don't know where that came from, but I was always confident in most situations. I still am in most situations, not all, because I enjoy it. And I think when you enjoy something, my belief is you've got to throw yourself all in, because then it's not a job, it's a passion. And I think that comes through. So if you're pitching, if you really believe in your product, your service, yourself, and you genuinely hand on heart think you can help the client, whoever you're in front of, it's not a pitch. You're articulating how you can help them. And that to me is what selling, pitching is all about, really.
In those early days in the kind of the call center and the software company, I mean, there's a difference sometimes, I think, when you're working for someone else rather than working to sell your own thing. How did you like mentally start to square that and find that passion to help and serve and provide clients with a great solution?
It's such a good question, actually. And there was two things that happened. So in the call centre, I was only there for 6 months. It was called Sitel. They do gas and electric utilities. And within a week, I became the top salesperson out of about 140 people. I didn't have a clue why. I didn't know what I did. Do you know what I mean? I did my thing. And I remember Daryl Badgett was the manager. He was probably the best manager, so inspiring. I loved him. He used to stand on a desk, to gee everyone up. Do you know what I mean? I loved him. And he said to me, "You've got this gift of being able to persuade people." And I was like, cool. And he said, "I want everyone to learn from you." But I couldn't really teach them because I didn't know what I was doing.
Interesting.
So I can't teach something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I guess they started to use my lines, my script, and started getting better results. But I think the big thing was then when I started selling software, that's when I fell in love with selling. But to answer your key question, I treated my job as I was the owner.
Right.
So even though I was a sales exec earning £16,000 a year, no commission, in my little brain, I was the owner. And I think thinking like that it came across that level of authority.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't the owner, in my little brain, I treated it like that from the outset.
And that kind of passion and belief in the product as well comes through if you can. Well, I talk a lot about acting as if, and it's something that actors do. But what would happen if you were the owner? What would happen if you were, I don't know, Sheryl Sandberg or Elon Musk? Like, how would you behave in that situation? You do something different.
Absolutely.
It's really, really powerful. I know, and you've mentioned him already. I know your dad has had a massive influence on your life. What did he teach you that you kind of carried with you into that early career and beyond?
Yeah, so Dad was amazing. He was like a hero to me. He was in sales for IBM. He was like an account manager, but he was very natural at presenting.
So it's in the genes.
It's in the genes, I think. And I remember I was about 13. I used to sit there in the house on the stairs watching him practice. And he'd be in his bedroom and have these sliding mirrored wardrobes. They were hideous. And he'd sit there with cue cards practicing and he'd practice like 3 hours a night for like 2 weeks. But hearing him speak was like, it gives me goosebumps now thinking about how good he was. And he had this charm and this humour. So hopefully I've inherited things from that. But what he always said to me, he said, if you're going to do a job, do it properly. He said, if you're going to build a house, there's no point doing it, quickly and trying to do it cheap. Do it properly. And the biggest thing he always taught me is if at first you don't succeed, try again. And I stick with that. And the final message he said to me is what you put in is what you get out.
Yeah.
And all that. So whenever I'm feeling a bit low, because we're human, or I'm thinking, I can't be bothered today, I go back to my dad's words and it just gives me that boost of, you know what, stick with this.
Yeah, so powerful. I think those early kind of experiences and influences, like they play a big part in who we become. My dad was in sales and service for a chemical company as well, and he was always so professional. I think that's what I remember growing up. Like you say, that kind of thing of taking things seriously, rehearsing, and really, caring. He grew up through the ranks. Started off repairing dishwashers and ended up, being one of the head sales guys within the organisation. So I think it is that kind of commitment and I suppose passion that is really important as well.
One of my favourite films is The Founder, about Ray Kroc.
Okay.
And if
McDonald's,
McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
He started off as played by who's the guy in Batman, Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
And he was a milkshake sales guy, right? But then he became the multi-billionaire. about, I say creator of McDonald's. He wasn't.
He bought it, didn't he? Yeah.
He bought it, right, for £1 million. And it became the colossal beast it still is. So for me, that tells you everything. What the opportunities available to people are limitless if you have a passion, a belief, and a desire.
So you started to kind of codify, I suppose, what you were doing in those early roles to help your colleagues, and with that support of the manager. How did that develop from being employed to going, do you know what, I'm good enough at sales to want to go and train other people on how to do this?
It actually wasn't me. So I was in the call centre for 6 months. I then got a job selling software. I had an opportunity to be a trader. I was always good with numbers, like mental arithmetic, and a sort of a loose connection around a company called Met Traders. It was like a boutique trading company, and the people around me were earning like 10 grand a day.
Right.
And I thought, wow, I've got to. And I did it for a year, and I possibly say I was the worst trader ever, like literally ever. I just couldn't bear losing money. So therefore I was so it was awful for me. I couldn't sleep at night holding a position. So after a year I left, and then my father-in-law approached me, Boyd, and said, Tony, you're one of the best cold callers I ever heard. He said, I'm one of the best trainers, Boyd. And he said, let's do something together. And that was in May 2006.
Wow. And the journey began. So
It did.
How did you go about creating the kind of methodology and deciding how to share that knowledge with other people?
So my first job selling software, my first B2B job, I got trained for a company called Pareto Law, who were very good. They were very, very good. And they do like a year's training program. And I learned so much from them. And I guess going back to your word about codifying, I sort of looked at all the stuff I learned and tried to put it in like a formula and a system. And I did. And that's what we used to coach. I didn't have a name for it, which I now do. I created a name about 4 years ago, which I'll get to. But I sort of knew how to coach it. And it's a bit like any coach. So I had a tennis lesson yesterday, and he watched me serve, and he could tell me 5 things I did wrong within a second. And I just can't see that. So when I did a serve that was unbelievable. It was like, I'd have aced anyone, Djokovic, right? And then the next serve, I couldn't even get it over the net. He was able to tell what I did differently. And I think the true expertise of a coach, a trainer, or anyone at anything is about observing feedback and spotting. And Billie Jean King, I watched a documentary of her last week, and she said feedback was everything. And it was about when you lose, learn from it, but also when you win. So get feedback of what works. And that goes back to the codifying. When I've looked at the best salespeople in the world, I was able to codify their traits. And I created a framework called the Ask Philosophy Principles, based on my observations and based on my success.
Yeah. I think that feedback piece is fascinating, because so many people fear feedback. They're like, oh gosh, I don't think I'm ready to hear this. I'd rather not know. Let's just sort of bury my head in the sand. But unless you really kind of understand what's working well, but what could be improved, then you never grow. And actors in a rehearsal room, if you're rehearsing for a play for 6 weeks, it's 6 weeks of feedback. That's exactly what you get, and together in combination with your coach in the acting world, that's the director, you develop the performance that hopefully wows the audience in the end. But without that, you can be a really good actor, but you just sit in your bedroom and read the lines and then show up on opening night, and it's probably going to be a disaster.
Well, I think it was Nelson Mandela said, you never lose, you win and you learn. And I think that's really powerful. So I've lost some big deals. We spoke just off off when we were coming onto the show about Country Range Food Group, and I lost a deal. It was probably going to be worth about 1.3 million for my company, which is big, right? For a one-man band at the time, it was big. But I lost it. But the feedback was invaluable, and although it still hurt, right? Of course it did. It was invaluable. But the other key point, which goes back to Billie Jean, is ask your customers why they chose you. Because so many companies or salespeople struggle to articulate their USPs, their unique selling points. And I've got an issue with a USP because it's about you, not about the customer.
I love that.
No one wants to be sold to. So I think it's a UCB, a unique client benefit. And to really know what our UCBs are, we have to ask our customers. And we don't do it in a egotistical way. We just say, Dom, you and I worked together for a year. Feedback's everything. Why did you choose us? And how's the experience been? What have you enjoyed about working with us? And I want to pick up those words, those statements, and use that in my marketing to try and win more customers like them.
Like you. Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. That's brilliant. Sorry to interrupt, but before we continue with the episode, I've got a favour to ask. I'm on a mission to get this podcast in the hands of as many people as possible. So if you've found what you've heard so far valuable, please, please, please like, comment, rate and subscribe. These things make a huge difference to our reach. And if you're open to it, if you happen to know just one person, someone who, just like you, would benefit from listening to these conversations, then please share the podcast with them. Let's get on with it. Let's go back to the kind of codification process and you know how you've developed these ideas. So you've written 5 books. Coffees for Closers was published by Wiley. Now that's a line from a play in a subsequent film called Glengarry Glen Ross, and the scene, for anyone that hasn't watched it, go and Google Coffees for Closers and see Alec Baldwin's performance, because it's pretty intense, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But do you think that sales is as brutal as Alec Baldwin's characters makes out?
I think then, yes. I think that was probably in the 80s. And I think it was very much that type. I mean, he was a car sales company, and it was brutal. He spoke about ABC, and that was a big thing, right? Always be closing. I believe it's still ABC, but it's now always be curious. And I think that's how sales has changed. It's not now about close the customer. Actually, it's about helping the customer, serve the customer, give value to the customer. And the only way we can do that is by being curious, inquisitive, listen, and then make a recommendation based on your knowledge, specialism, and expertise.
How do you develop that curiosity?
It's a great question. I guess it was 2 ways. One is develop the right questions. And that's the starting point. And I call those killer questions. And the best way to design your killer questions is write out a list of information you want to try and ascertain and turn those into great questions. And I then think just practice the art of a conversation. And it goes back to Pareto law, the 80-20. I think when you ask the right question, you're more likely to get the right answer. So I think it's a testing, a bit like when you're acting. You're testing which question gets the best response. Results. And when it works, then you're showing you're inquisitive, you're learning so much, and then you're in the best position to help the customer and win them as a client.
I think that preparation piece is so important, as you say, kind of working out what questions, not so that you necessarily have a script. I know that some sales teams work really well with scripts. For me personally, I find that it's quite difficult sometimes for people to bring that to life as if they're speaking it for the first time. But to have a list of questions, things that you've practiced out loud, so you've felt the words come out of your mouth, is incredibly powerful, because that feels authentic to your audience, because it's come from you and it's not something that someone else has given you. But it gets you into that situation where you can discover that information that you're looking for.
Well, I think it's the 10,000 hours, right? It's got to be natural, genuine, authentic, sincere, and the only way to do that is by practicing. But the key is practicing the right thing. So if I was going back to my tennis analogy, if I didn't have a coach, I'd be practicing serves the wrong way.
Right.
So I'm never really going to get better because I keep practicing the wrong thing. So the only way really to do it is find out the right way to do it that gets the best results and practice that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the key.
So talk to me a little bit about the ask methodology and the principles that sit behind that.
Yeah, so when I looked at all my content, and there's quite a lot there, it's sort of 23 years in the making, I sort of try to chunk it down and looked at what actually is it that I'm doing? What's the formula? And it did come down to three things, which was you've got to attract the right prospects into your world. You've got to solve those prospects' problems so they become a client. And you've got to keep those clients for life so they become raving fans. And that's the ask philosophy principles.
Nice.
And I called it philosophy principles purely for alliteration, and it's easy to remember, right?
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, but it just sounded good, I think. But I think the ask is, and the other point of it is, you have to ask for the business.
You do, yeah.
So for me, it's twofold. It's one is, how are you going about attracting the right prospects? How are you solving the problems? And how are you keeping them and nurturing them and developing relationships? And most importantly, are you asking for the business at the end of the process?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you're known for from a speaking perspective is conducting live sales calls on stage. So, you know, you'll say to the client, give me a list of numbers. You'll phone people up, and you'll make the ask. That's a massive kind of jeopardy, and you know, a real kind of risk. What made you take the leap and start doing that? And how do you create success in that process?
No, good question. So for me, it isn't that sort of a leap of faith, really. I don't see it special. I think others do, but I've practiced it 10,000 times.
Yeah.
So there's pretty much, it's very rare they're going to say something that I haven't heard before. Right? That's the first point. But the second point is, you know, what's the worst that's ever going to happen? Which is, thank you, I'm not interested. Pretty much. So, and I think the third point is it's feedback. So if I don't, obviously if it goes to voicemail, there's nothing to learn.
Yeah.
But if I'm having a 30-second conversation and it doesn't go anywhere, where's the lesson? So I teach people to think about where's the lesson? There's always lessons, but most people don't look for them. So I want to focus on what word did I use? What question did I ask? What statement did I make that resulted in a negative outcome?
Yeah.
And equally, what did I say, ask, state that came to a positive outcome? So for me, and the other reason I do it is, it's impressive. So not to me, but to the audience, because most people don't do it. And I think the other thing is I'm showing salespeople that actually, if I can pick up the phone in front of 800 people to phone a lead that I've never spoken to on behalf of a company that I don't know anything about, I'm getting about 1 minute of information.
Yeah.
Then what's stopping anyone in an office on their own making a call? Right? There just isn't anything, in my opinion. So that's why I do it, just to sort of say to salespeople, no one's got an excuse. If I'm crazy enough to do that, no one's got an excuse. You know?
Have you noticed over the years, you know, going to voicemail more? Do you think having sales conversations are more difficult because people are less attached to their phones?
No question. I think part of it is COVID, and the fact people are working remotely makes it harder because sometimes getting their mobile's difficult. But when you do, if they don't recognise the number, they're not going to pick up. But there's sort of 2 or 3 techniques I teach for that. One is called VET. VET stands for voicemail, email, text. So, and you could WhatsApp, text or WhatsApp, really, whatever your preference is. So every time I make a call, if I don't get an answer, it's voicemail, but then I'll send a generic email or a technique I'm going to give you in a minute. And then I do a text, exactly the same technique. And the technique is this: the voicemail go, "Hi Dom, it's Tony. Can you give me a ring? 07915 Thanks." So I do not mention why I'm phoning. I don't mention my company, and I use informal language to give a perception that we know one another. You know, "Hi Dom, or hi Dominic, Tony, can you give me a ring?" and I get about 40% success rate of people calling me.
Wow.
And I do the same in a text, I do the same in an email, and I get callbacks. So
that's fascinating.
Although it's hard on the first time, but the second thing I do is I warm up a phone call. So I use a software called BombBomb, where it's video emails. So what I do is I'll send an email, a video email first. And in fact, actually, I've got it here. So this wasn't prepared, but I hold this up, right? So this was a call I did yesterday to a guy called Jerome.
Yeah.
So I hold that up.
So it's a little, for those of you that are listening, it's a little speech bubble, the whiteboard.
Speech bubble.
Very clever.
So I go, hi, Jerome. And the reason I do that is when you paste it, embed it into an email, the image is you holding up his name.
Yeah.
He's likely to open it. So, and the message is really simple. I don't talk about what I do. I talk about what I've done successfully with people like them. And there's a lot of prep that goes into that, but I deliver that within 25 seconds with a call to action of I'm going to be reaching out over the next few days. And I just try different things. If they don't take a call, I'll send a copy of my book. I might send them some lumpy mail with something a bit engaging and different. And I just keep trying. And I think something I learned years ago, a coach said to me, is if you're knocking on a door and the door is firmly locked and the door is never ever opening, try the window. And I thought that was really good advice for, I now work with a company called Verisure that do security alarms, so that might not work with them. Do you know what I mean? But it might. But I thought it was a really clever point of don't keep trying the same thing that's not working.
Yeah.
Mix it up. You've got to try something different.
So I love the informal, hey Tony, it's Dominic, can you give me a call? When you spoke about warming people up, and I think that's really important. So this person then, so I've left you that message, and you call me back. There's a danger that you're a little bit suspicious and going, I kind of like, I don't really know who you are, but I feel like I should phone you. So how do you in that next touch point, really the first touch point that is human to human, do you put them at their ease and make sure that they feel like they're getting value from the conversation rather than being insulted?
Excellent question. So going back to the point of you've got to do some research and prep. So when I leave a voicemail for Dominic, there's obviously it's generic of, hi Dominic, give me a ring. But I know word for word what I'm going to say if I was to have got hold of you.
Okay, yeah.
So therefore, when you call me back, I know word for word what I'm going to say. I just need to make a note of Dominic works for Inspire, and that's, I'm expecting his phone call.
Yeah.
So when you call back, and all I say is, Dominic, thank you so much for getting back in touch with me. The reason I'm reaching out to you, or the reason I reached out to you was, and then I go into my opening gambit.
Right.
Now, sometimes they go, oh, I don't like that. That was a bit cheeky to, for me to call you. And I said, I appreciate that, but you've called me. We're speaking. And now I just want 20 seconds of your time to demonstrate why it's worthwhile that we speak.
Love it.
I had a great one, Dominic, actually last week. I phoned this guy and I finally, it took me probably 3 weeks to get hold of him. It was a cold call. I call it a smart call. And he answered the phone. His name was Michael. I said, Michael, Tony Morris. He said, yeah, you've been leaving loads of voicemails, Tony. I can't speak. I'm in a meeting. And I said, put this on loudspeaker. They're going to want to hear this. And he laughed. He laughed. He said, I admire that. Give me a ring this afternoon. I promise we'll speak. And we did.
Amazing.
So, that was I quite liked that. I enjoyed that.
I think that's brilliant. So, I mean, you've given loads of value already on the call, for people that are in sales, for people that are pitching. There's going to be a large percentage of people that are listening that don't see themselves necessarily as salespeople. But my belief is that we're all in sales. We're always pitching. We're always trying to get people to buy into our ideas or into us. What are your top tips for people to help them increase their success when they're engaging with an audience?
So I think the first point is your first question to me is what's my most memorable or most successful pitch? And it was winning my wife. And, and I say winning, not like she's a game or as a trope, right? But I saw her in a bar. I fancied her immediately and I was panicking. I was nervous and I thought, right, what am I going to say? And actually it was a lot easier than I realized because she was so adorable. And I used a line that I practiced and it went dreadfully. I used the line and it didn't work. I was like gutted, but it was good feedback. And then I got her number the next day, luckily, and the rest is history. So I think the point is for that is everyone is in sales. If you've got a partner, if you've been on a job interview, if you've got children and you've wanted them to do something, if you've got friends that you wanted to encourage them to go to this place, this restaurant, all of those, if you've got an argument with your sibling or your parent, they are sales interactions.
Yeah.
You just don't see it like that. So I think that's key. And I think to answer your other question of how do you do it in terms of to give most value to an audience, you've just got to keep reminding yourself you are a problem solver. You're not actually a pitcher or a salesperson. So if you can understand anyone's problems and genuinely can help them, you're not selling. You're serving. You're helping. You're giving value, and that's how I see it. So I think, and it was the great Zig Ziglar. He said, "You can have anything you want in life if you can help enough people get what they want." I think it's a really powerful message.
Yeah, great switch of mindset. You're very clear on your purpose. So, you talk about empowering and developing and inspiring 1 million people in sales. Why do you think a clear purpose is an asset when it comes to selling and engaging?
I don't think it's even about in sales or engaging. I think knowing that having a crystal clear vision, purpose, or you could argue your why, is absolutely everything. Because if the late motivational speaker Richard Denny said, if you don't have a goal, you can't score. So it's almost like, why are we doing what we're doing? Now, for me, my why is so important to me. And it was my dad, bless him, passed away when he just turned 55. He worked for IBM. It was in July 31st, 2006. I set my company up in May 2006 and I got married in October 2006. So it was in the middle of these two life-changing things for me, right? And in my dad's last year, he bought a boat, a sailing boat, and he wanted to name it after my sister and I. And my sister's called Lucy. So he said, Tony, have you got any ideas? And I thought, I'm a bit mental. My sister's called Lucy, so put our names together. It's Looney. I thought, that's perfect.
Perfect.
So, and my kids are Harry and Poppy, which is happy. So my whole mantra is happy Looney. That's like my whole why system. Yeah, H is help, don't sell. A is always give it all, so on and so forth. Yeah. But it's for me, that's so close to my heart that I don't see this as a job or a career. This is my everything. It's to make my dad proud. It's to make my children proud and bring them up the right way. And it's to give my family everything by following the Happy Looney methodology or system, if you will.
That's brilliant. If you're running your own business and kind of carving your own path, it's, I think, sometimes simpler to be able to find that why and that purpose. You work with lots of people that are, working for an organization. They're building their careers. Any advice to people in a job about how to develop that purpose and that sense of why?
Yes, definitely. So I remember I was at a conference 10 years ago and I said, show of hands, who's motivated by money? And it was a sales conference and about 90% of people put their hand up. And I picked on one person in the front, right? Because his hand was like so high up. I said, what's your name? He said, Richard. I said, Richard, you're motivated by money? He said, absolutely. And I said, okay, so if I could offer you a job today that pays you 5 times what you're earning right now, would you take it? He said, well, it depends on what. What's the job? He said. And I said, the fact you've even asked that tells me money is not your driver. Because if it was, you wouldn't have questioned what the job is. Yeah. So most people say money is their driver, especially in sales, but actually it's what we do with that money. So I think for those listening that are in a job, or working for someone or with someone, just keep asking why.
Yeah.
Everything. I want to earn money. Why?
Why?
I need to earn this. Why? Why? And if you keep questioning it, I think you'll get to the root cause of why you're doing what you're doing. And I think if you can make that so personal to you, like I have, it's a game changer.
Brilliant advice. Tony, I could carry on this conversation all day, but we're going to wrap things up if that's okay. And I'd like to ask you one final question. If you could go back and give that 11-year-old boy cleaning cars one piece of advice, what would it be?
Apart from obviously invest in Amazon, which is an obvious one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? An obvious one. I'd probably say never quit. I think that's what I would say is never quit. And that's not just sales, that's anything. If you want anything in life, it's always hard and difficult, always. Because if it wasn't, it's not worth having. And I think whatever you put your mind to, anything, is just don't quit. Because Vince Lombardi, the famous American football coach, he coached the Green Bay Packers in America, said, winners never quit and quitters never win.
Amazing advice. Thank you so much, Tony, for joining me on the podcast.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Why Life's a Pitch podcast. If you'd like to improve the way you pitch and communicate, I'm giving away a special gift to all my listeners. We've developed the Pitching with Impact scorecard to help you benchmark your pitch performance in 6 key areas. It will take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll receive a detailed, personalised report packed full of insights and ideas to help you improve and grow. Just head over to dominiccolenso.com/scorecard to get started.